In this video, we're going to discuss tuples, which are collections, and then how to nest structures within each other. So first off, just a quick review of collections we've seen before. So we've seen a list, which is ordered collection and indexed by integer values starting at 0. So the index is positional. The list is mutable, which means we could change its values, add, delete values from it. And we use the square bracket notation to declare and access elements in the list. And now we looked at a dictionary, which is an unordered collection that maps keys to values. The keys in the dictionary are unique. And then the dictionary, just like a list, is mutable. And then we use the curly brace notation to declare a dictionary. Now, a tuple, just like a list, is an ordered collection where the index is positional starting at 0, but the tuple is immutable, meaning that once we create a tuple, its values cannot be modified. And then lastly, to declare a tuple, we're going to use the parentheses, but to access elements in a tuple, we will use square brackets for access. Okay, now just a quick note about the pronunciation of tuples. So you hear some folks pronounce it tuple. So both pronunciations are perfectly fine, tuple or tuple, so whatever you prefer. Okay, so let's look at an example of declaring and accessing elements in a tuple. So here we have tuples to record representing student record, and then we have the name of the student, their major, and the GPA. And if and notice the parentheses enclosing the three values which indicate that this is a tuple. Now, if I want to access the first element in the tuple, I use the square bracket notation and specify the index. So here it's 0, so I'm accessing this element. Slicing works just like it does in lists, so there are no differences whatsoever, except that the slice from a tuple is a tuple, just like a slice of a list is a list. So here, slice of a tuple is a tuple. Okay, similar to a list, we could iterate through the elements of a tuple using a for loop. So tuple is an iterable collection. We could iterate through it the same way as a list. Now, one thing that sometimes causes confusion with tuples is that the parentheses are optional in some cases. So for instance, here I could declare a tuple of three values, 1, 2, and 3, and it's perfectly fine not to enclose them in the parentheses. So Python will recognize that as a tuple. So if I were to print x, you could see that it is a tuple because it put the parentheses around. Now, one oddity is that if you want to declare a singleton, a tuple with a single element, so to do that, you have to put a comma after the values. So otherwise, if I were to say something like x equals 1, Python will treat that as an integer, not as a structure, and the comma is what allows Python to interpret it as a structure. So here we are. If I were to have the statement print x, we can see it's a tuple of a single value. Now to the main difference between tuples and lists, that is, tuples are immutable. So here, if we were to try to modify the last element in our tuple, change the GPA to 3.5, we get an error that item assignment is not supported. So this is to be expected based on the definition of a tuple. Now, Python gives us a very convenient way to extract elements of a tuple. So suppose I've declared this tuple to record one. Again, that's what the example we've seen before. And say I want to extract all the values from the tuple and put them in variables all in one step. So this is what I'm able to do, what I do in this statement. So this is referred to as tuple unpacking. So I'm extracting the values from the tuple all at once. So what I'm essentially doing is putting the value unpack Laura into the variable name, DSC into the variable major, 3.4 into GPA all at once. And then you could verify that by outputting the values of these variables. And as you can see, it did it correctly. So this is, a very convenient syntax to extract, to do multiple things in a single statement. Otherwise, we would need to use a loop and go through the tuple one element at a time and assigning the values to variables. So this is a bit more convenient in that respect. Now, a very common use of tuples is for in instances where we want to return multiple values from a function. So in certain cases, that makes sense that a function needs to return multiple values. So as an example, let's suppose I have a function called list stats, which computes some basic statistics about a list of numerical values, and computes the minimum, the maximum, and the average value. And I'd like to return all three values from the list. So first, let's just look briefly about how I would compute those. So there are built-in functions in Python, min, max, give me the minimum and the maximum value in a list. Sum, something we've seen before, sums up the elements of the list, and len is the length of the list. So the average is just the sum divided by the length. So I could compute these three statistics, minimum, maximum, and average, and return them in a single statement right here. And what this is doing is that it's creating a tuple of these three values, and I'm returning that tuple all at once. And if I were to call the function with this list as an input, as an argument, then it outputs the minimum value, the maximum value, and the average. So this is something to keep in mind. And again, this is a very common usage of tuples. Now, next topic we're going to talk about is how to embed collections within collections. So this is the idea of a nested structure. Now, this is quite important in certain cases, to represent solutions to some problems. So we're gonna look at a couple basic examples, so you could get a sense of when you'd want to do that. So first example is, let's suppose I'd like to store a list of student records, and each student record is represented as a tuple. So what might that look like? So here we are. So I have variable students. It's a list. You see the square bracket notation. It's a list of three tuples, tuple 1, tuple 2, tuple 3, and the tuples are enclosed in parentheses. So I have three student records. So this is a nested structure because the outer collection is a list, and then the elements of the list are tuples, which are collections themselves. So if I want to print out the student record at index 1, so the first element is at index 0, second student is at index 1, and then the third one is at index 2. So if I were to print out the student record at index 1, then I use a square bracket notation and I get Jasmine, data science major. Now, if I want to only output the name of that student, then I'm gonna use a second set of brackets and an index. So the way to interpret this is that students sub 1 is a tuple. Oops, let's do this again. So it's a tuple, and I want the element at index 0 from within that tuple. So given this tuple, the element at index 0 is just the first element. So that gives me Jasmine. So now as a further example, let's suppose I just want to refer to the first character in the name. So I just want to refer to that first character. So again, let's see how that would work. So students of 1 is a tuple. Students sub 1 sub 0 is a string. And the third set of braces gives me the character within the string. So at index 0. So I want the first character of the name, which gives me J. So you can see this notation might seem a bit convoluted, but it's very logical in how it works. Okay, we're going to look at a second example. So here, instead of having a list of tuples, we're going to have a dictionary of student course registration records. And the dictionary key is the email address for each student in my collection. So what would that look like? So here I have dictionary called enrollments. I have my curly brace notation, and each key value pair in the dictionary, so the key and the value. So the key is an email address, which is assumed to be unique, and that satisfies the criteria of a key in a dictionary. So the key is an email address, and the value corresponding to the key is a list of courses in which the student is registered. So here we have a list of strings. So Joe is enrolled in the courses DSC 100, Math 221, Sociology 100. Jasmine is registered in these 3 courses, and Jen in these 3 courses. So now if I want to access the list of courses for a given student, I specify the key within the square brackets. So enrollment sub joe at southernct.edu gives me the list of courses that Joe is enrolled in, which is DSC 100, Math 221, and Sociology 100. So that's what we have here. Okay, now let's suppose I'd like to add an element to that list, to the list of courses that Joe is currently enrolled in. So here's the syntax for that. So I'm gonna access the list. So enrollments sub Joe, when I'm using Joe as the key, that's giving me the list of courses, and given the list, I'm gonna append to it the course Math 150. So now after I append to the list, If I go back and print the value corresponding to this key, I see that math 150 was added over here. So again, the key idea here to understand how to call the methods correctly, to try to understand what type that this notation before the dot returns. So if this gives me a list, then I could use any list method on that. Okay, so that's the basic idea. So with that, this concludes the video. Thank you. Until next time.